The Grand Concord Hall on Athanus Prime was the largest meeting room in the known galaxy. It sat at the heart of a station built in neutral space, far from any empire's border, designed for one purpose only: to give the powerful species of the galaxy a place to argue without shooting each other. Most of the time, it worked. Today, every seat in the hall was filled. Delegates from 9 species had come for the summit on mining rights in the Velen Corridor, a stretch of space so rich in rare minerals that wars had already been fought over it twice. The stakes were enormous, and when the stakes were enormous, everyone brought their best soldiers. The Keth Dominion arrived first, as they always did. Their death-sworn guards marched in 2 perfect lines, 8 feet tall, covered in dark green scales, each one carrying a plasma lance that could cut through starship armor. Their heavy boots made the floor shake with every step. High Arbiter Velthari, the old reptilian elder who led the Keth delegation, walked between them like a king between his swords. The Drenali Collective came next. Their shock troopers wore powered exosuits that hissed and clicked with every movement, sealed tight against the station's air, which was too dry for their amphibian lungs. Delegate Torvan, their nervous and detail-obsessed representative, checked a datapad as he walked, already reviewing the security arrangements for the 3rd time that morning. The Osavan Confederation sent their warriors, massive, fur-covered beings who stood nearly 9 feet tall and carried graviton hammers that could crush metal into dust. Observer Gritha, their diplomat, moved with the slow grace of someone who had fought in wars and chosen peace afterward. And then there was the Council's own security force, led by Commander Pellin. Pellin was an insectoid, 8 limbs, a hard shell of dark chitin, and compound eyes that could see in almost every direction at once. He wore the heaviest armor on the station, and carried enough firepower to hold a corridor against a small army. He considered himself the most dangerous being in any room he entered, and until today, he had been right. Every species brought weapons. Every species brought armor. It was not just tradition, it was law. The Galactic Council's security protocols required all delegations to bring armed protection. It was seen as a sign of strength, of seriousness, of respect for the dangers that came with high-level diplomacy. So when the human delegation walked through the main doors of the Grand Concord Hall, every conversation in the room stopped. Ambassador Yuna entered first. She was a tall woman, with sharp eyes and black hair pulled back from her face. She wore a simple dark suit, and carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that made people listen before she even opened her mouth. She was Earth's voice on the galactic stage, and she had earned that position not through softness, but through a mind like a blade. Behind her came 6 guards. They wore dark dress uniforms, perfectly pressed, with polished shoes and clean white gloves. Their hair was neat, their posture was straight, their hands were clasped behind their backs. And that was all. No weapons, no armor, no helmets, no shields, no energy blades, no sidearms, nothing. Captain Tejo led the guard detail. He was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s, with a calm face and steady dark eyes. He moved the way water moves, smooth, unhurried, and impossible to stop. Behind him walked Lieutenant Hana, small and light on her feet, her eyes scanning the room with a focus that never broke. Then came Sergeant Dohyun, the youngest, with a warm smile that seemed out of place in a hall full of armed soldiers. Corporal Minho walked in silence, his face showing nothing at all. And finally Specialist Nari, carrying only a small medical kit, where every other guard in the room carried a gun. Delegate Torvan stared at his datapad. He checked the human manifest once, then twice, then a 3rd time. He looked up at his aide with wide, wet eyes and said, "There must be a mistake. They have listed no weapons at all." There was no mistake. High Arbiter Velthari leaned forward in his seat, his old yellow eyes narrowing. He could not decide if this was an insult or a bluff. Either way, it angered him. To come unarmed to a council summit was to say that you did not take the proceedings seriously, or worse, that you did not consider anyone in the room a threat. Commander Pellin decided to make his feelings known directly. He walked across the hall toward Captain Tejo, his 8 legs clicking against the polished floor, his armor catching the light. He stopped in front of the human and looked down at him. Pellin was taller by a full head and outweighed the man by at least 100 pounds of chitin and metal. "Captain," Pellin said, his voice buzzing through his translator, "I notice your delegation appears to be incomplete. Where are your weapons?" Tejo looked up at him. He did not step back. He did not tense. He simply met the insectoid commander's compound eyes with his own steady gaze and smiled. A small, polite, perfectly calm smile. "We won't be needing any," he said. Pellin stared at him for a long moment, then made a sound that his translator rendered as a laugh, and walked away, shaking his armored head. But not everyone laughed. Observer Gritha stood across the hall, watching the exchange with her arms folded across her broad, furred chest. She had seen many things in her long life. She had fought in the border wars and survived the siege of Athlon. She had stood across from enemies who wanted her dead, and allies she did not trust. She knew what danger looked like. And right now, looking at 6 unarmed humans in pressed suits, standing quietly behind their ambassador, every ancient instinct in her body was telling her to be careful. It was not the way they stood. It was the way they breathed. Slow and even, like resting predators. It was the way their eyes moved, not nervous, not searching, but tracking, cataloging. Every guard in the room, every weapon, every exit. They were doing it constantly and without effort, the way a person breathes without thinking about it. Gritha opened her personal log and wrote a single entry. "They are not unarmed. I simply cannot see the weapon." The summit began. Ambassador Yuna took her seat. The 6 human guards stood behind her, in a loose half-circle, hands behind their backs, faces calm. And every alien in the Grand Concord Hall kept glancing at them, unable to explain the feeling that had settled into the room like a cold wind. Something was wrong. They just could not figure out what. The first day of the summit passed without incident. But the unease did not pass with it. If anything, it grew. It started with the small things, the way the human guards changed shifts without speaking. One would simply move, and another would take their place, as if they could read each other's thoughts. The way they positioned themselves around Ambassador Yuna at meals, never blocking her, never crowding her, but always forming a pattern that covered every angle of approach. No one told them where to stand. They simply knew. Delegate Torvon could not let it go. He was a creature of protocol and procedure, and the idea of unarmed guards at a galactic summit ate at him like an itch he could not reach. On the evening of the first day, he pulled Archivist Quailos into a private meeting room and closed the door. Quailos was old, even by the long-lived standards of his species. He had 4 eyes, 2 large and 2 small, and all 4 of them looked tired. He was the Council's chief historian and the keeper of every species file in the Galactic Archive, a record of the biology, culture, military strength, and threat level of every known civilization. "I need the human file," Torvon said. Quailos blinked all 4 eyes slowly. "Which sections?" "Military capability, combat doctrine, anything that explains why they think they can walk into this summit without a single weapon." Quailos was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made Torvon's blood run cold. "The human military file is classified at the highest level." Torvon stared at him. "By the humans?" "No," Quailos said. "By us. By the Council's own intelligence division. The file was flagged as psychologically disruptive to unprepared species." He paused. "I have never read the full file myself." I was advised not to. Torvon left the meeting feeling worse than before. On the second morning, 3 Keth Deathsworn decided to test the humans. They found Sergeant Dohyun alone in a corridor near the dining hall. The Keth soldiers were enormous. Each one stood over 8 feet tall, their scales thick as armor, their plasma lances humming at their sides. They stepped into Dohyun's path and formed a wall of muscle and metal. Dohyun stopped walking and looked up at them. He was a full meter shorter than the smallest of the 3. He had no weapon, no armor, and no backup in sight. He smiled. "Good morning," he said brightly. "Those are beautiful lances. Is that a handmade grip on yours? The leatherwork is really impressive." The Keth in the center, a scarred veteran named Rothak, leaned down until his face was inches from Dohyun's. His breath smelled like sulfur and iron. "You are either very brave or very stupid, little human." "Which is it?" Dohyun seemed to think about this genuinely. "Probably a little of both," he said. "Are you hungry? I was just heading to the dining hall. The station has this grain bowl that is actually not bad if you add enough of the red sauce." The Keth stared at him. One of them, the youngest standing at the back, had been running a biological scanner the entire time. His job was to read the human stress levels, heart rate, breathing, cortisol levels, any sign of fear. There was nothing. Dohyun's heart beat at a steady resting pace. His breathing was slow and even. His cortisol levels were lower than some sleeping species. He was not pretending to be calm. He was calm. Completely, genuinely, impossibly calm. The 3 Keth guards reported this to High Arbiter Velthari that evening. Rothak, the scarred veteran who had faced enemies across a dozen worlds, could not hide the unease in his voice. "He was not brave," Rothak said carefully. "He simply was not afraid. There is a difference, Arbiter. I have stood across from brave soldiers. They fight their fear and master it. This human had no fear to fight." It was as if the idea of 3 armed Keth Deathsworn standing over him did not register as a threat at all. Velthari said nothing. He sat in his chair and thought for a very long time. That same day, Observer Gritha followed Lieutenant Hana during a routine security walkthrough. Gritha kept her distance, watching from behind columns and around corners, using skills she had learned in decades of military service. Hana walked the corridor slowly, her hands behind her back. She looked relaxed. She looked like a woman taking a pleasant stroll through a space station. But Gritha watched her eyes. Hana's gaze touched every door, every ventilation shaft, every ceiling panel, every structural joint in the corridor walls. She was mapping the station in her mind, not with scanning equipment or computers, but with her bare eyes and her memory. She counted steps between intersections. She noted which doors opened inward and which opened outward. She paused at windows and studied the thickness of the glass. Gritha decided to test her. She waited until Hana's back was turned, then deliberately knocked a small object off a shelf, creating a sudden sharp sound behind and to the left. Hana did not flinch. She did not look. She did not react in any visible way. But her body moved. It was so subtle that Gritha almost missed it. A slight shift of weight, a tiny turn of the shoulder, a repositioning of the feet so small it might have been mistaken for a natural step. In less than a heartbeat, without appearing to do anything at all, Hana had moved into a position from which she could respond to an attack from any direction. Gritha felt the fur on the back of her neck stand up. It was an old reflex. A prey reflex. She had not felt it in 30 years. That evening, Commander Pelon invited Captain Tejo for drinks in the officers' lounge. Pelon told himself it was professional courtesy. In truth, the human fascinated him, and that fascination bothered him. They sat across from each other. Pelon drank a thick, dark liquid that smelled like machine oil. Tejo drank water. "I will ask you directly," Pellin said, because he was not a creature built for small talk. "If armed attackers entered the summit hall tomorrow, what would your people do?" Tejo held his glass of water and seemed to consider the question seriously, as if it deserved real thought. Then he spoke, and his voice was calm and quiet and absolutely certain. "Commander, I want you to understand something," he said. "We do not carry weapons to these meetings, not because we are peaceful. We do not carry them, because, at this range, we do not need them." Pellin looked at him for a long time. He searched the human's face for a joke, a bluff, any sign that he was exaggerating. He found nothing. The human meant every word. Pellin did not sleep well that night. And in the archives, in a locked room deep in the station's core, Archivist Quillas sat alone, with the classified human file open on his screen. He had told himself he would only read the summary. Then just the first section. Then just a little more. Now he sat in the blue light of the screen, all four eyes wide open, reading a single passage over and over again. Humans do not possess a standard fight-or-flight response as observed in other galactic species. Instead, they exhibit what researchers have termed a fight-flight or fight-harder response. Under extreme stress, the human body releases a chemical called adrenaline, which does not impair cognitive or physical function as stress hormones do in most known species. Instead, it dramatically enhances them. Humans under threat become faster, stronger, more focused, and more resistant to pain. In short, the more dangerous the situation becomes, the more dangerous the human becomes. Quillas closed all four of his eyes. Then he opened them and read it again. The third day of the summit began badly and got worse. The argument had been building since the first session. The Keth Dominion and the Drenali Collective had been fighting over a border region for the better part of a century. And the Velen Corridor mining rights negotiation had dragged the whole ugly history back to the surface. By midday, High Arbiter Velthari was struggling to keep order. Delegate Torvan accused the Keth of stealing Drenali survey data. A Keth general called the Drenali a species of cowards. Voices rose, fists and claws and tentacles clenched. Ambassador Yuna sat quietly through all of it, watching, waiting for the right moment to speak. Behind her, the 6 human guards stood in their usual half-circle, calm and still as statues. Then the doors exploded inward. Not the main doors, the 2 side entrances, heavy reinforced panels designed to withstand a direct hit from a ship-mounted weapon. They blew off their hinges like paper, and through the smoke and debris came 4 Keth soldiers in full combat gear. They were not death-sworn. Their armor was unmarked, stripped of rank and insignia. Extremists, radicals from a faction that believed the Keth should take the Velen Corridor by force and end the debate forever. They moved fast. 2 took positions at the ruined side doors. 1 sealed the main entrance with a magnetic lock from inside. The 4th, the leader, a massive Keth with a scar that ran across his entire face, walked to the center of the hall and raised a ballistic rifle above his head. "No one moves," the leader said. His voice boomed through the hall. "This summit is over. The Velen Corridor belongs to the Keth Dominion. You will sign the agreement we present, or you will not leave this room alive." Panic erupted. Alien delegates scrambled behind their tables. Guards from every delegation reached for their weapons. And nothing happened. The extremists had brought electromagnetic disruption fields, portable devices strapped to their backs that sent out a wave of energy designed to kill every electronic system in range. Every plasma lance in the room went dead. Every energy blade powered down. Every piece of powered armor locked up and became nothing but dead weight. The Keth Deathsworn stood helpless, holding weapons that would not fire. The Drenali shock troopers tried to move in their exosuits and found themselves trapped inside frozen metal coffins. Commander Pellin outside the hall, with the bulk of his security force, heard the blast and immediately began trying to cut through the sealed main doors. But the magnetic lock held firm. The disruption fields did exactly what they were designed to do. Every advanced weapon in the Grand Concord Hall was useless. Every advanced weapon. The four extremists carried ballistic sidearms, simple weapons that used chemical propellant to fire metal slugs. Old technology, primitive technology. The kind of technology that did not care about electromagnetic fields, because it had no electronics to disrupt. Against a room full of delegates whose guards now held expensive pieces of dead metal, 4 soldiers with ballistic weapons were more than enough. The leader pointed his rifle at the delegates. Everyone, to the center of the room, now. Species that had conquered star systems obeyed. They shuffled to the center, guards and diplomats alike, stripped of their power and their pride in a single moment. Ambassador Yuna did not move. She sat in her chair, her back straight, her hands folded on the table in front of her. She looked at the extremist leader with an expression that was not fear and not anger, but something closer to patience, as if she were waiting for a late train. Then she looked at Captain Tejo. Tejo stood behind her, his hands still clasped behind his back. His eyes had not changed. His breathing had not changed. Nothing about him had changed at all. He looked at his ambassador and gave a nod so small that no one in the room caught it except the 5 people who were trained to. What happened next took 11 seconds. Do-hyun moved first. He was the closest to the extremist, guarding the left side door, a distance of about 8 meters. He crossed it in 3 steps, not running, something faster than running, something more controlled, a burst of movement so explosive that the Keth guard did not even begin to raise his weapon before Do-hyun was on him. The Keth outweighed Do-hyun by 80 kilograms. He wore combat plating thick enough to stop a blade. None of it mattered. Do-hyun caught the barrel of the ballistic weapon with his left hand and pushed it sideways and down, away from the crowd. With his right hand, he delivered a single open palm strike to the exposed skin of the Keth's throat, just above the armor line. The Keth's eyes went wide, his legs folded. He went down hard, and before his body stopped sliding across the polished floor, Do-hyun had stripped the weapon from his hands, ejected the magazine, locked the slide back, and set the pieces down on the floor with the careful precision of someone setting a table for dinner. 3 seconds. Hana and Minho moved at the same time, each one taking one of the 2 guards at the right side door. Hana was fast. Not fast for a human. Not fast for a soldier. Fast in a way that made observer Gritha, who was watching from behind a fallen table, feel something close to religious terror. One moment, Hana was standing beside Ambassador Yuna. The next moment, and Gritha would later swear that she simply did not see what happened in between. A Keth extremist was falling unconscious to the floor, and Hana was standing over him, straightening the cuff of her uniform sleeve as if she had done nothing more strenuous than open a door. Minho, true to everything anyone had ever observed about him, said nothing. He appeared behind his target like a shadow gaining weight. His arm went around the Keth's neck. Not crushing, not violent, but precise. A chokehold applied to the exact spot where a Keth's blood vessels ran closest to the surface. The soldier struggled for 2 seconds, then went limp. Minho lowered him to the floor carefully, almost gently, and stepped back. 7 seconds gone. The leader stood in the center of the hall, with his rifle raised. He had seen 3 of his soldiers go down in 7 seconds, and his brain was still trying to understand what had happened. He swung the rifle toward the closest human, Captain Tejo, who was already walking toward him. Walking, not running, walking. The leader fired. Tejo moved his head 2 inches to the right. The slug passed close enough to disturb his hair. He did not slow down. He did not speed up. He walked straight into the leader's guard, caught the rifle barrel with one hand, and pushed it up toward the ceiling. With his other hand, he delivered a single open palm strike to the center of the Keth leader's chest. The sound it made was like a heavy door slamming shut. The Keth leader was large. He was armored. His species had reinforced bone plating across their torso, dense enough to turn aside most bladed weapons. He had fought in 3 wars and survived things that would have killed most other beings. 11 seconds. Start to finish. Specialist Nari stepped forward from behind Ambassador Yuna, medkit already open. She moved to the first downed extremist, the one Do-hyun had dropped, and knelt beside him. She checked his breathing. She examined his throat for damage. She administered a mild anti-inflammatory from her kit, and placed him in a recovery position, handling his body with the same care a doctor would give any patient. Then she moved to the next one, and the next. She treated every single extremist, one by one, making sure none of them were seriously hurt. The Grand Concord Hall was completely silent. 300 delegates and guards from 9 species stood frozen, staring at 6 unarmed humans who had just dismantled 4 armed soldiers in the time it took most people to draw a breath. Captain Tejo straightened his collar. He touched his ear, activating his comm. "Commander Pellin," he said, his voice as calm as it had been 3 days ago when he had first walked into this hall. "Situation resolved. You can take your time with the doors." He turned, walked back to his position behind Ambassador Yuna, and clasped his hands behind his back. Ambassador Yuna had not moved from her chair. Her glass of water sat on the table in front of her. Undisturbed, she picked it up, took a small sip, and looked across the hall at High Arbiter Valkyrie, whose ancient yellow eyes were wider than anyone had ever seen them. "Shall we continue?" The summit was suspended. The extremists were taken into custody by Commander Pellin's security force, who finally cut through the sealed doors 20 minutes after the incident was already over. Medical teams rushed in and found all 4 Keth attackers alive, breathing, and neatly lined up in recovery positions, with their wounds already treated. The medics looked at Specialist Nari, who was closing her kit. She gave them a friendly nod and stepped back to let them work. Within an hour, the security footage from the Grand Concord Hall had spread to every delegation on the station. Within 2 hours, it had been copied, analyzed, slowed down, and studied frame by frame by every military attaché on Aethanus Prime. By the end of the day, it was the only thing anyone was talking about. No one talked about the extremists. No one talked about the political crisis, or the mining rights, or the Velen corridor. They talked about 11 seconds. Delegate Torvan locked himself in his quarters and began compiling a report for his government. His hands shook as he dictated into his recorder. "Human reaction time," he began, "is approximately 3 times faster than the galactic average. Their skeletal structure is denser than any species their size, allowing them to deliver and absorb impacts that would cripple or kill most other beings. Their muscles operate at a baseline efficiency that our species can only achieve through cybernetic enhancement." He paused, swallowed, continued. "Under stress, their bodies release a chemical compound that increases their speed, strength, and focus simultaneously. They do not freeze under threat. They do not slow down. They speed up, and perhaps most disturbingly, they possess the ability to consciously suppress their own pain response. A human can be injured, seriously injured, and continue to fight at full capacity by simply choosing to ignore the pain." He stopped the recording and sat in silence for a long time. Commander Pellin watched the footage alone in his quarters. He watched it at normal speed first, then at half speed, then at quarter speed, then frame by frame, his compound eyes tracking every movement of every human in the hall. What he saw at quarter speed was impressive. What he saw frame by frame terrified him. The humans were holding back. Every strike was measured. Every movement was controlled with a precision that spoke of thousands of hours of training, and a level of body awareness that Pellin had never encountered in any species. Do-Yoon's palm strike to the first Keth's throat had landed at the exact force needed to incapacitate without causing permanent damage. 1 inch higher, 1 degree harder, and it would have crushed the windpipe. Minho's chokehold had been applied to the precise spot that would cause unconsciousness in a Keth in under 3 seconds, which meant he had studied Keth anatomy before the summit. Hana had moved with a speed that the cameras could barely capture, and yet she had caused the least physical damage of any of them, using the attacker's own momentum to bring him down. And Taeho. Pellin watched the captain's palm strike to the Keth leader's chest over and over. He ran the biomechanical calculations himself. The force Taeho had used was exactly enough to drop a Keth with reinforced bone plating. Exactly enough. Not a fraction more. The captain had calibrated his strike to his target's species, size, and armor in the half-second between grabbing the rifle and making contact. If Taeho had used his full strength, the Keth leader would be dead. Pellin closed the footage and requested a private meeting with Captain Taeho. They met in a small conference room. No drinks this time. No pretense of casual conversation. Pellin sat across the table from the human, and for the first time in his career, spoke to another being with something close to humility. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you not carry weapons?" Taeho was quiet. He seemed to understand that the question deserved a real answer, not a clever one. He folded his hands on the table and spoke slowly. "Humans evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day," he said. "Our world had extreme temperatures, natural disasters, diseases that could wipe out entire populations, and predators that were bigger, stronger, and faster than us. We were not the strongest species on our planet. We were not the fastest. We were not the most armored or the most venomous." He paused. "But we survived. We survived because our bodies learned to adapt to anything. We can function in extreme heat and extreme cold. We can eat almost anything organic and survive. We heal from injuries that would kill most species. Our bones break and grow back stronger. And when we are threatened, our bodies do not shut down. They turn on." Pellin listened without moving. "Every other species I have met at this summit carries weapons because they need them," Taeho said. "Your technology is your advantage. Take away the plasma lances and the powered armor and the energy fields, and most of these species are vulnerable. That is not a criticism. That is simply how they evolved. They evolved to build tools that made them powerful." He met Pellin's eyes. "Humans evolved differently. We did not evolve to build weapons. We evolved to be weapons. Our hands, our bodies, our minds, they are the weapon. Everything else is just accessories." Pellin was still for a long time. Then he asked the question that had been sitting in his chest since he watched the footage. What would have happened if there had been 40 extremists instead of 4? Taeho considered this with the same seriousness he gave every question. "It would have taken longer," he said. Pellin believed him. That was the worst part. Across the station, observer Gritha found Lieutenant Hana sitting alone in the observation lounge, looking out at the stars. Gritha sat down beside her, without asking permission. They were quiet together, for a while. "I knew," Gritha said finally. "From the first moment you walked into that hall, something in me knew what you were, an old instinct. I have not felt it in 30 years. Hana looked at her. "Prey instinct?" Gritha nodded slowly. "My species evolved from herd animals on the plains of Asavar. Millions of years ago, before we built cities and starships, we survived by knowing when a predator was nearby. That instinct never fully went away." She looked at Hana. "You triggered it, all 6 of you, from the moment you entered the room." Hana did not look offended. She looked sad. "I am sorry," Hana said quietly. "Do not be," I want to understand. How do you live with it, with being what you are, with carrying that much danger inside you, and still walking so softly?" Hana thought about this for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. "That is exactly why we walk softly," she said. "We have to. If we did not, if we let ourselves be what we could be without control, without restraint, we would be monsters, and we know that. Every human who serves in a role like mine knows that. We train not just to fight. We train to stop. We train to hold back. We train to be gentle. Because gentleness for us is not weakness. It is the hardest thing we do." Gritha looked at the small human woman beside her and felt the prey instinct flare one more time. Then she felt something else. Something newer and stronger. Respect. That evening, Archivist Quilos stood before the full Galactic Council in a closed session and read from the classified human file. The room was silent as he spoke. He read about human endurance, how they could run for hours without stopping, how they could survive wounds that would kill any other council species, how their bodies repaired themselves with a speed and completeness that bordered on regeneration. He read about their adaptability, how they thrived in deserts and frozen wastelands and underwater and in the vacuum of space with nothing but a thin suit between them and death. He read about their combat capability, their reaction speed, their strength relative to their size, their ability to learn and master any weapon or fighting style they encountered. And then he read the final assessment, the line that the Council's own intelligence division had written at the bottom of the file. The most dangerous thing about humans is not their physical capability. It is their capacity for restraint. They are strong enough to destroy and disciplined enough to choose not to. This combination, power and control, strength and gentleness, is unique among all known species and should be considered the defining characteristic of the human race. The room was quiet for a very long time after that. High Arbiter Velthari sat alone in his chamber that night. On his desk was the formal protest he had drafted on the first day of the summit, a complaint about the human delegation's failure to bring armed guards, a violation of council protocol. He read it once, then he deleted it. The summit resumed on the morning of the fourth day, and the Grand Concord Hall felt like a different place. The blast damage had been repaired overnight. The doors had been replaced. The scorch marks on the floor had been polished away. Physically, the room looked exactly as it had before the attack. But nothing was the same. The alien delegations filed in and took their seats, and every single one of them looked at the human guards differently. The confusion was gone. The contempt was gone. In its place was something more complicated, a mixture of respect and honest, healthy fear that sat in the room like a living thing. But more than the guards, they looked at Ambassador Yuna differently. They understood her now. Her choice to bring unarmed guards was not a mistake. It was not arrogance. It was not ignorance of galactic protocol. It was a message, and the message was this: we are so confident in our people that we do not need to arm them. We came here carrying nothing because we did not come here to threaten you. We came here to talk. And you should take comfort in that, because it means we chose peace. We could have chosen differently. The negotiations moved quickly. The tension that had poisoned the first 3 days had evaporated. The Keth Dominion, embarrassed by the extremist attack and shaken by what they had witnessed, made significant concessions on the Velen corridor dispute. High Arbiter Velthari, who had spent days treating the human delegation with barely hidden contempt, now spoke to Ambassador Yuna with careful, genuine respect. The Drenali Collective, having read Delegate Torvan's report on human capabilities, became remarkably cooperative. No one wanted to be the species that tested the humans further. Humanity was granted expanded mining rights in the Velen corridor, rights that exceeded what most analysts had predicted they would receive. But more than that, Earth's standing within the Council shifted, not through violence, not through threats, through the simple, undeniable demonstration that humanity was not a young, naive species stumbling into galactic politics. They were something else entirely. During a break in the afternoon session, Delegate Torvon approached Ambassador Yuna at her table. He stood in front of her, his wet amphibian skin glistening under the hall's lights, and his hands were clasped tightly together in a way that meant shame in Drenali culture. "Ambassador," he said, "I must confess something. On the first day of this summit, I filed a formal complaint with the Council regarding your guards. I considered their lack of weapons to be a breach of security protocol and an insult to the proceedings." Yuna looked at him with steady, kind eyes. "And now?" Torvon was quiet for a moment. "Now I believe I was the one who did not understand. I would like to withdraw the complaint." "Accepted," Yuna said simply. She smiled and gestured to the woman standing behind her. "Delegate, have you met Specialist Nari? She is the one who treated the Keth soldiers after the incident." Torvon turned and looked at Nari. She was young, warm-faced, and she carried nothing but a small medical kit. She bowed her head politely. Torvon stared at her. "You healed them? The same people who attacked the summit?" Nari nodded. "They were injured. It is my job to help injured people. Even enemies?" Nari tilted her head slightly, as if the question confused her. "They were patients." Torvon opened his mouth, closed it, and then bowed deeply, the deepest bow a Drenali could give. He turned and walked away without another word, and those who knew Drenali customs understood that he had just paid the human medic the highest compliment his culture could offer. That afternoon, Commander Pelun did something unprecedented. He sent a formal request to the United Earth delegation, proposing a joint training exchange between his Council security force and human diplomatic guard units. It was the first time in galactic history that the Council's chief of security had asked another species for training. Captain Tejo accepted the request in a brief meeting. He shook Pelun's hand, a human custom that the insectoid commander had clearly researched in advance, because he extended one of his 8 limbs and gripped Tejo's hand with surprising care. "We will be honored, Commander, but we should start slow." Pelun tilted his armored head. "Why?" Tejo's expression was completely sincere. "We do not want to discourage anyone." Pelun stared at him for a long moment, decided the human was not joking, and felt something that his species did not have a word for. The closest translation would be the feeling of realizing that you have been swimming your entire life, and have only just learned that the ocean has a bottom. Observer Gretha submitted her official report to the Asavan Confederation that evening. She had spent the entire summit watching the humans more closely than anyone, and her report reflected that. It was thorough, detailed, and precise. But it was her final conclusion that would be quoted in Asavan textbooks for generations to come. "Humans are not the galaxy's newest species," she wrote. "They are its oldest predators, wearing the thinnest mask of civility. They walk among us with soft voices and open hands, and every instinct in my body tells me to be afraid of them. But here is what I have learned. The mask is genuine. They choose peace not because they are weak, but because they understand violence better than any of us ever will. They have been fighting since before they could think, and somewhere in the long, bloody history of their world, they learned that the greatest strength is not the ability to destroy. It is the ability to choose not to. I believe they are the most dangerous species the galaxy has ever known. I also believe they may be the most kind, and I believe those two things are connected." The summit concluded with a formal reception in the Grand Concord Hall. Drinks were served, speeches were made, hands and claws and tentacles were shaken. The business of the galaxy continued, as it always did, with words and agreements and carefully worded promises. The 6 human guards stood at their posts throughout the reception. They were calm, they were polite, they were immaculately dressed, and they were utterly unarmed. But no one joked about it anymore. High Arbiter Vilfari passed Captain Tejo on his way out of the hall. The old reptilian paused, his ancient yellow eyes studying the human with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and something that, on a Keth face, looked remarkably like warmth. "Captain," Vilfari said, "I must ask, during the attack, were you ever truly worried?" Tejo thought about it. He gave the question real consideration, the way he gave everything real consideration. "I was worried about scuffing my dress shoes, Arbiter," he said. "They are new." Vilfari stared at him. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then the ancient reptilian elder, who had led the Keth Dominion through 2 wars and had not been known to show emotion in public for over a decade, began to laugh. It was a deep, rough, grinding sound, like rocks being crushed together, and it echoed through the grand Concord Hall and made every head turn. Tejo smiled politely and bowed. Late that night, after the delegations had retired and the hall had been cleaned and the lights had been dimmed to their nighttime setting, 6 humans gathered on the observation deck at the top of Athenis Prime. They were out of uniform, just 6 people in casual clothes, standing in front of a window that stretched from floor to ceiling, and looked out at the stars. The Velen corridor was visible in the distance, a faint band of light against the black, the resource-rich stretch of space that had brought them all here. Do-hyun was laughing about something. He was always laughing about something. He was telling Nari about the 3 Keth Deathsworn who had tried to intimidate him in the corridor, and he was doing impressions of their faces when he invited them to lunch. Nari was laughing too, leaning against the glass, her medkit sitting on the floor beside her feet, because she carried it even off duty. Minho stood slightly apart, as he always did, watching the stars with his quiet, steady gaze. Hana sat on the floor next to him, her back against the glass, her eyes half closed, looking more relaxed than she ever did on duty. Captain Tejo stood at the edge of the group, his hands in his pockets, watching his team, his people. He had chosen each of them personally, the same way Ambassador Yuna had chosen him. Not for their strength, though they were strong. Not for their skill, though they were skilled. He had chosen them because they understood the weight of what they were and carried it with grace. Ambassador Yuna appeared at his side. She had changed out of her formal suit into something simpler, and without the armor of her office, she looked younger, tired, but satisfied. They stood together in silence for a while, watching the stars turn. "They are afraid of us now," Yuna said softly. "All of them." Tejo shook his head slowly. "No, they understand us now. That is different. Fear fades, understanding stays." Yuna looked at him. "Is that why you do this job? Unarmed, surrounded by aliens with guns, standing in rooms where everything could go wrong in a heartbeat?" Tejo watched his team. Do-hyun was now trying to teach Nari a card game he had invented. Minho was watching them with what might, on anyone else, have been a smile. Hana had fallen asleep against the glass, her breathing slow and even, finally at rest. "Someone has to show them," Tejo said quietly. "Someone has to show them that the most dangerous thing in the room can also be the kindest. That strength and gentleness are not opposites. That you can walk into a room full of weapons with nothing but your hands and your training and your choice to do no harm. And that choice means something. It means everything." He paused. "Otherwise, what is the point of being strong?" Yuna did not answer. She did not need to. She simply stood beside him, and together they watched the stars, and the silence between them was the comfortable silence of people who understood each other completely. Outside the glass, the galaxy turned slowly in the dark. Aethonus Prime hummed with the quiet energy of a station going to sleep. Somewhere in the depths of the structure, alien delegates lay awake in their quarters, thinking about what they had seen and what it meant. Somewhere, Archivist Quillos was updating the human file with new data. Somewhere, Commander Pellon was planning a training schedule he was not sure his soldiers could survive. Somewhere, Observer Gritha was writing a letter to her children, telling them about the strange, small, terrifying, gentle species she had met at a diplomatic summit. And on the observation deck, 6 unarmed humans stood quietly at the edge of the galaxy, carrying nothing but themselves, which, as the Galactic Council had just learned, was more than enough.